What would you do if a hotel manager looked you in the eye and told you that a man like you wasn't welcome here, even though you had just sold out his entire city? Sam Cooke smiled, reached into his jacket, and did something nobody in that parking lot saw coming. It was October 8th, 1963. Sam Cooke and his band had just finished the second of two sold-out shows at the Municipal Auditorium in Shreveport, Louisiana. 12,000 people over 2 nights, every seat filled, the kind of nights where the crowd was still singing in the parking lot long after the house lights came up. The box office receipts were sitting in a leather satchel in the trunk of the lead car, and the band was tired in the particular good way you get tired after a show that went exactly right, loose and quiet and satisfied, the music still running somewhere in the back of the mind like a song you can't quite let go of. Sam Cooke was 22 years into his life and at the absolute peak of his commercial power. Another Saturday Night had spent 3 weeks at #1 that summer, and wherever his tour went, the venues filled and the money came and the crowds arrived already knowing every word to every song. He was the rare kind of performer who had managed to be both critically respected and commercially dominant at the same time, which in 1963 was not a common thing, and which had given him a degree of financial independence that most black artists working the same circuit did not have access to. He knew what he was worth. He kept careful track of it. What didn't change in the fall of 1963 was the sign above the door of the Hotel Bentley on Edwards Street in Shreveport. Not a physical sign exactly, more the kind that exists in the posture of the man behind the front desk, in the way he looks at you when you walk in, and the way he looks past you when he's decided the conversation is already over. Sam Cooke walked in through the front entrance with his road manager, a man named Bobby Womack, who had been on the road with him for 2 years and who had navigated this particular situation in more cities and more hotels than either of them cared to count. The lobby was cool and bright, all marble floors and brass fixtures, the kind of hotel that had a certain idea of itself. A ceiling fan moved the air above the front desk. The man behind the counter looked up when they entered, and something in his face settled into a familiar configuration, not hostile exactly, but finished, decided, the way a door looks when it's already closed. "Help you?" the man said. His name tag said Gerald. Bobby stepped forward with the reservation confirmation, which he had telephoned in 3 days earlier under initials only, a trick they had learned on the road because it was the only way to secure rooms in certain cities without the phone being put down before the sentence was finished. Gerald looked at the paper. He looked at the 2 men in front of him. He set the paper on the counter. "I'm going to have to ask you to try the Milam Street rooming house, about 6 blocks south." Bobby started to respond, but Sam Cooke put a hand briefly on his arm, and Bobby went quiet. This was something the band had learned. When Sam Cooke put his hand on your arm like that, you went quiet and you waited, because whatever was coming next was going to be worth waiting for. Sam Cooke looked at Gerald for a moment without speaking. He was not a man who used silence as a weapon exactly, but he understood its weight, and he was comfortable inside it in a way that made other people uncomfortable, which was its own kind of power. He looked around the lobby slowly, at the ceiling fans, the brass fixtures, the marble floor, the burgundy-upholstered chairs arranged in pairs near the window, the row of room keys on their hooks behind Gerald's head. "How many rooms do you have in this hotel?" Sam Cooke asked. Gerald blinked. It was not the question he had been expecting. "I don't see how that's—" "I'm just asking," Sam Cooke said pleasantly. "How many rooms?" Gerald said reluctantly that the hotel had 42 rooms. Sam Cooke nodded as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. Then he thanked Gerald for his time, picked up the reservation confirmation from the counter, folded it carefully along its original crease, put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, and walked back out through the front entrance into the Louisiana night. His band was waiting outside with the luggage, 9 men in the warm October dark, the air still holding the day's heat the way Louisiana air does long after the sun goes down, thick and close, and smelling faintly of the river.
Some of them were sitting on their instrument cases, some standing with their hands in their pockets, a couple of them talking quietly about nothing in particular. They all had the particular expression of people who have been through this before and know approximately how it ends, which is with a long drive to a rooming house in a part of town that the hotel would never put in its brochure. It was a familiar choreography. They knew their marks. Sam Cooke stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up at the facade of the hotel. Then he asked Bobby for the tour ledger, which Bobby produced from his briefcase. Sam Cooke opened it to the current week and looked at a column of numbers for approximately 30 seconds. Then he closed the ledger, handed it back to Bobby, and said, "Get me a phone." In 1963, getting a phone meant finding one, which meant the payphone on the corner of Edwards and Common Street, where Sam Cooke stood with his back to the hotel and made 2 calls. The first was to his accountant in Los Angeles, a man named Walter Briggs, who answered his home telephone on the 3rd ring and did not sound surprised to hear from Sam Cooke at 11:15 on a Tuesday night, because this was simply what working for Sam Cooke was like. Walter was methodical and quick, and he had the relevant figures in front of him inside of 2 minutes because he kept the tour accounts and a ledger on his desk at home the same as at the office. The second call was to a lawyer in New Orleans, whose name Sam Cooke had been given 6 months earlier by another musician, who said he was the man you called when you needed something done in Louisiana that required both speed and discretion. That call was shorter. The lawyer asked 3 questions and then said he understood and that it would be handled.
The calls took 11 minutes total. Sam Cooke's band waited on the sidewalk and said very little to each other because there was a quality to Sam Cooke's posture at that payphone, the set of his shoulders, the particular stillness of him, the way he held the receiver, that communicated without words that something was in motion, and the appropriate response was patience. He came back from the payphone and told the band to find dinner. He named a restaurant on Milam Street that he knew from previous tours, a place run by a woman named Mrs. Thoreau, who kept the kitchen open late for musicians coming off late shows, and who made a red beans and rice that several members of the band had been discussing since they crossed the Louisiana state line 2 days earlier. He told them he would meet them there in an hour and a half. Then he went back into the Hotel Bentley. Gerald was still behind the front desk, speaking quietly with a colleague, and he looked up when Sam Cooke came back through the door with the same expression of settled finality as before, the door that is already closed expression, ready to repeat the direction to the Milam Street rooming house if that was what was required. Sam Cooke walked to the front desk and placed both hands flat on the marble surface, which was cool under his palms. He said, "I'd like to speak to the owner of this hotel." Gerald said the owner was not available at this hour. Sam Cooke said he was happy to wait. There was a quality to the way he said this, not threatening, not aggressive, just absolutely and completely certain, that produced in Gerald a sudden and visible uncertainty about the structural integrity of his position. He excused himself and disappeared through a door behind the desk. Sam Cooke stood at the counter and waited with his hands still flat on the marble and his eyes moving slowly around the lobby, taking inventory. The man who came back with Gerald was not the owner, but the night manager, a heavy-set man in his 50s named Harlan Dupree, who had the look of someone called away from something more comfortable than this. He introduced himself and asked what he could do for Sam Cooke. Sam Cooke told him he was interested in purchasing a block of rooms for his touring party. He named a figure, the full rack rate for all 42 rooms for 3 nights, which he had calculated from the numbers in the tour ledger and the rates printed on a card he had noticed sitting on the counter during his first visit. The figure he named was accurate to the dollar. Harlan Dupree looked at Sam Cooke. He looked at Gerald. He looked back at Sam Cooke. All 42 rooms, Sam Cooke confirmed. The conversation that followed lasted about 20 minutes, and the people who were present for it, Gerald, Harlan Dupree, and a bellman named Curtis who positioned himself near the luggage rack and did not move for the duration, described it afterward in similar terms. Sam Cooke was courteous throughout. He did not raise his voice. He did not make speeches about justice or dignity or the movement that was reshaping the country that very fall.
He simply named a number, answered questions about payment and duration, and waited with complete composure while Harlan Dupree made his own phone call to the actual owner of the hotel, a conversation that took place in the office behind the front desk with the door closed, and that lasted 9 minutes. When Harlan Dupree came back out, his expression had changed. The transaction was completed. Sam Cooke paid for 42 rooms for 3 nights, far more nights than he and his band would use, far more rooms than they needed, the excess rooms standing empty for those 3 days as a kind of arithmetic proof of something that didn't require articulation. He paid in full, in advance, and received a receipt that he folded and put in the same inside pocket of his jacket where the rejected reservation confirmation was already waiting. His band arrived from Mrs. Thoreau's restaurant 2 hours later, full, warm, and expecting the familiar logistics of the rooming house on Milam Street, to find their luggage being carried through the front entrance of the Hotel Bentley by 2 bellmen in uniform. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment in a loose group, looking at each other, and then looking at the entrance, and then back at each other, assembling the picture one piece at a time. The marble lobby was visible through the glass doors, the brass fixtures, the ceiling fan. Sam Cooke was standing near the front desk with his jacket over his arm, watching them come in, and his expression was the one he wore when he had done something he considered to be simply the logical next step, rather than anything remarkable. The expression on their faces as they understood what had happened was something Sam Cooke remembered for the rest of his life. Not the shock of it exactly, but the thing underneath the shock, the particular recalibration that happens when someone does something that shifts your understanding of what is possible, and, by extension, what you are permitted to expect. One of the trumpet players, a quiet man from Birmingham named Roosevelt, stood in the lobby doorway for a full 30 seconds without moving, his eyes going from Sam Cooke to the bellman to the marble floor and back, and then he laughed, a short, involuntary sound, more like a cough, and shook his head slowly, and walked in. Bobby Womack sat on the edge of his bed in room 27 that night and looked at the ceiling for a long time. Later, he would say that what stayed with him wasn't the gesture itself, large as it was, but the specificity of it. Sam Cooke hadn't made a speech. He hadn't organized a protest. He had looked at the situation, identified the one lever that was available to him, and pulled it, quietly, completely, and with the kind of precision that comes from knowing exactly what you are doing and why.
He didn't do it to make a point, Bobby said years later. He did it because it was the thing that was actually available to him that night. He was always looking for what was actually available. Word spread through the black music community the way word spread in those years, which was person to person and city to city and dressing room to dressing room, the story accumulating small details as it traveled, some accurate, some embellished, all of them circling the same essential truth. Musicians who came through Shreveport in the months that followed asked about the Hotel Bentley. Some of them went and stood in front of it. A few of them went inside. Sam Cooke never spoke about it publicly. He gave no interviews on the subject, made no reference to it in his music, attached no narrative to it that would allow it to become the kind of story that gets told at his expense rather than on his terms. It existed in the community of people who knew him the way certain things exist, not as a symbol or a lesson or an example, but simply as a thing that happened, evidence of a particular kind of character, filed away and returned to when the occasion called for it. He drove out of Shreveport the following morning with his band in 4 cars, the Louisiana flatlands opening up ahead of them in the early light, the next city on the itinerary 300 miles east. The receipt from the Hotel Bentley was in his jacket pocket. The tour ledger was open on the seat beside him. Somewhere on the road between Shreveport and the Mississippi state line, he picked up the ledger and drew a small line through the Hotel Bentley's name, which was the system he used for places that had been resolved and could be set aside. Then he put the ledger down and watched the road and thought about the next show. That was Sam Cooke. Not the man who made speeches, not the man who sought credit for the quiet things, not the man who confused the gesture with the goal. The man who looked at what was available, used it completely, and moved on. Because there was always another city, always another auditorium, always 15,000 people who had driven through the dark to hear something that made the world feel, for a few hours, like a place where the things that should be possible actually were. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that real courage doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it walks quietly back through the front door with a checkbook and a plan. And tell us in the comments, have you ever watched someone respond to injustice in a way that surprised you? We read every single one.